Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cloverly Academy. My name is Sophia Wardell, and today we have a very special guest, PR specialist and CEO of Flow Publishing, Eve Bailey. Eve Bailey is the founder and CEO of Eve Bailey Media, based in the heart of LA, where startups, businesses, athletes, and influencers of all kinds come to get noticed. Eve is also a former journalist and crisis communications expert. Thanks for joining us today, Eve.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Sure, we're happy to have you. And today I want to talk all about PR prep and just the entire process with you. So, Eve, what does the typical press process look like?
Absolutely. So typically when we get authors working with us, it varies based on their genre, right? We have worked with authors who are in the nonfiction space, who are in the fiction space. And the first step that we really do is we sit down and we kind of determine a strategy plan depending on what genre they're in and what topic they're writing about. As you know, there are so many different types of books out there, and each genre and each topic really has a different game plan. If you're a nonfiction author, right, you might want to go on, commentary shows. You might want to go on political shows, or you might want to go on, your local TV, right? Or on the other hand, if you're a fantasy author, right, you want to go to a completely different space, right? You want to be talking to where your readers are, where people break down this type of content, fantasy podcasts and fantasy YouTube channels. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to decide, what is our game plan? And from there, we're going to create a story based on, your brand and your book.
Right. Yeah, that's so interesting. And again, I can see how it really varies. Now, in regard to PR, what would you say are the main elements needed in PR?
So the first thing that you need is a story, right? When you're pitching journalists, when you're pitching shows or podcasts, it doesn't really matter, what medium. You need to have a story. And when I say story, it doesn't just mean your book, right? Everybody's got a book. We need something that is actually compelling that we can pitch to journalists. It's not just, the written component that you see in the newspapers. It could be podcasts, it could be TV, it could be radio. And I'll use an example of one of my clients. And if you have ever tried to get PR, one of the things that you'll know is, for fiction authors, it can be incredibly difficult, right? And that's because of a lot of reasons. One of them is just there's so many fiction authors out there, but a lot of times it's really hard to break into the news cycle. So what you have to do as a fiction author, you have to create a really great story. And that story might be about your book, or it might be about you, right? So we have an author that we work with. Her name is Mina Brower, and she's a fantasy author, which can be very difficult to get media coverage for, but she has an amazing story. She started writing when she was pregnant, and she used it as an outlet for her during that time. And then postpartum, she continued writing. And then she was also working as a lawyer at the time in Chicago.
Wow.
And she's immigrant, and she has all of these great stories that kind of build into who she is. And that's how we're able to pitch her, right? We pitch her on her inspiring story of being a mom and still being able to write, and also figuring out how to self-publish and like create an amazing product, which a lot of authors know, it's not easy to self-publish a book. I mean,
Right.
it's easier to self-publish a book, but it's hard to self-publish an exceptional book, right? So it's creating that story that producers and podcasts can kind of glum onto, right? To, book you on your show and get featured.
Right, exactly. Now, I want to get a little technical. What are some ways you can plan a great PR launch? What do authors need to know?
100%. So there's quite a few aspects to getting a really great PR launch. And again, I hate to be like, it depends on your genre, but it really depends on your genre. One of the things that we like to do for nonfiction authors, if you're writing a story about, something that happened, right? Like, let's say, I'll give you like a very high level example. We have a potential client, right, who used to play polo with King Charles, right? And so he's working on his memoir. And one of the things that as we, work on this process with him is we're going to pick out those really interesting news stories from his experience, right? Like King Charles is inherently newsworthy, right? And the media loves to talk about King Charles. So it's like, okay, like working from your book, like what are some interesting like nuggets that we can pull out here and give to the Daily Mail and give to TMZ and give to the New York Post, right? So if you're a nonfiction author and you've experienced something inherently newsworthy and interesting, go through your book and kind of pick out like, what are things here that I could see, or headlines, or have I interacted with, somebody who's newsworthy that I could pitch that story to? For fiction authors, it's completely different. For fiction authors, you need to think about yourself as an author more as the news hook versus your actual story, right? Because journalists, it's hard to write about, Dungeons and Dragons and all that jazz. While we love it, right? It's hard for journalists to write about that. So you have to think about the you. And I think one of the things that a lot of authors who are just starting out forget about is that your local media wants to cover you. If you are living somewhere that's not a major metro area, I would say, New York, LA, it's hard to get coverage as a local author. But if you're living in Plano, Texas, or, even San Diego, San Diego is a great little media market that's not too big, not too small. They want to cover local authors who are really doing a great job and getting their books featured, especially if you're traditionally published, but even if you're self-published too, so don't forget about, going to your local media. That's not just TV, right? That's print, that's radio, that is podcasts. A lot of times, I just filmed a segment on this yesterday. A lot of folks forget that people still listen to radio.
Right.
Yeah, and for local authors, it's a really, really great outlet for you. And they're constantly looking for radio guests, especially if you're nonfiction. I always say if you're writing about politics, money, or religion, and sometimes sports, radio is a great outlet for you.
Well, Eve, that is so interesting. Thank you so much for the wonderful insight on PR prep and process.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
Lastly, Eve, where can our listeners find and connect with you?
Awesome. You can connect with me on Instagram. That's where I'm the most active, and that's evebailey.media.
That's all the time we have for today. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to today's interview with PR specialist and CEO of Flow Publishing, Eve Bailey. Be sure to check out our website for more videos. Wishing you all a fulfilling and successful writing journey.